It has finally warmed up here a little bit. It's been quite cold, and so now we can get back to this project, which I've been very eager to get working on. But we'll be doing some wet sanding tonight to smooth out the hull surface. And when it's below freezing, I don't think you can do wet sanding. I think the wet sanding would freeze on the surface as you started to sand. That'd be ice sanding. Never heard of that. So today, all of a sudden, this warm wind blew in, and it's about 60 degrees, which is lovely. So I want to show you the difference between wet sanding and dry sanding. If you haven't done any wet sanding before, you're in for a bit of a treat, I think. Because wet sanding goes so easily. It takes away all the negatives of sanding, or at least the things that seem like negatives to me. There's no dust, so there's no dust in the air. You're not breathing any dust. And the sandpaper never clogs up when you're wet sanding because the water keeps the sandpaper clean. And so your sandpaper keeps cutting much more effectively. That's why wet sanding is so nice, those two things. And there are really no negatives with wet sanding. You cannot use regular sandpaper. This is regular production paper on here. You can see the sort of brown tan color. You have to use wet sanding paper. Typically wet sanding paper is black, sort of dark gray, black, and it'll always say on the back, wet or dry. See there. Wet or dry, and this is 120 grit. And again, 120 means in each square inch of sandpaper, there are 120 grains of grit. I haven't counted. Actually, it looks like more than 120 to me, but that's kind of the concept, at least. Try counting for yourself. So we'll be wet sanding with the black sandpaper. The only negative, there is one negative of wet sanding. The only negative of wet sanding is when you're sanding, everything is wet and glossy, and so you can't see the places. There's no distinction between the high places, which you've sanded and will be a matte finish, and the low places, which are still glossy because you haven't hit them with sandpaper yet. So it's hard to tell by visual indications whether you've sanded an area sufficiently. So since you can't see it, you're relying more on touch. You can feel the bumps. You can feel a bump that's less than 1/1000th of an inch. Your fingertips are very precise instruments. So when you're wet sanding, you really have to rely on touch and feel. One thing that we want to watch out for here is we do not want to sand down into the fiberglass cloth. We certainly don't want to sand down through the fiberglass cloth. Now there are a few things that we'll be looking for. So just the last note on that. So you'll be wet sanding and then feeling it with your fingers. See if it feels smooth. If there's still some roughness, any bumps or anything, sand a little bit more and feel it. Keep feeling it though. Then we'll finish off the last touch. Once we get it really good, we'll finish off with a piece of dry sandpaper. Wipe the boat down and finish off with dry sandpaper, because then we'll be able to see where the glossy areas are still between bumps. The dip between a bump will still be glossy. So with the dry sandpaper, we'll be able to just finish off the last little bit and get everything to a matte finish and make sure we don't have any irregularities. Then we can do it visually. So we'll combine those two techniques. Now there are a few features. It is winter here in the Northwest, in an unheated shop, but typically we have, well, there's some days where it's too cold to work out here, but we have a lot of weather in the Northwest where it's really quite comfortable. Like tonight, I think it's about 60 degrees, which is a little warmer than normal, but great time since I'm going to be wet sanding. Great temperature. However, the night that we started to work on the fiberglass cloth, and once you start, you're committed, was a little bit on the cool side. And that makes the resin thicker and a little harder to squeegee out smoothly. There are some places where most of it came out really nicely. All of it came out great. The fiberglass cloth is tight and on the boat, and no wrinkles, it didn't have to use any pleats or anything. It all conformed beautifully. That's the important thing. But there are places where on the sides, down the sides, there's some heavier buildup of resin than we really want. And that's because the resin was a little bit thicker due to the cold than would be absolutely ideal. But no problem, it just means a little bit more sanding to get the thicker buildup of resin off and get a perfectly smooth finish. So sanding is an easy solution to that. The other thing that happened was that night, after we got all the resin on, we had a warm wind blow in, and the temperature went up at least 5 degrees, maybe more like 10 degrees. And all of a sudden we started getting bubbling because the resin hadn't set up. So we have, and we knew it. We don't walk away from a project and just say, hey, we're done, see you tomorrow. We were still checking it, and it was like, oh, bubbles forming. So we squeegeed over it to break the bubbles, and did two techniques. One, squeegeed over it, and that works fine, and the other, alternating with the other technique, which is using a dry brush, one of the 1-inch brushes, and just lightly dragging the bristles over it, not pressing the bristles down into the resin. The bristles should stay completely clear of resin. If they start to drag and catch in the resin, you haven't let the resin set up quite enough. But just dragging the dry bristles over the resin, that pops the surface of the bubble and lets the bubble, you know, here's the surface of the bubble forms a cavity in the resin and then a round surface on top. So when you drag the brush, bristles of the brush over the resin just gently, it breaks the surface bubble, and then the cavity starts to fill in. So you need the resin still to be a little bit liquid. So we did that, and we got rid of most of the bubbles. But as I run my hand over this, in fact, you can almost hear it. There are some little bubbles on the surface that came up. They're above the fiberglass cloth, so they're really not an issue. You don't want any bubbles underneath the fiberglass cloth, definitely. So very pleased with the way it turned out, but we do have those two things we're going to take care of tonight. Sanding the surface smooth where there's some irregularities from excess resin and some irregularities from little bubbles that formed. And ideally, you'd be able to coat your boat in, at a 70-degree temperature. That would be perfect. The resin would be quite fluid and flow nicely. You wouldn't be fighting the resin setting up too quick. You really can't have the resin set up, while the resin you've just put on, you can't have it set up while you're mixing a new batch of resin because you need a wet edge everywhere. You have to work with the wet edge, or else you'd have the fiberglass cloth permanently, formed into hardened resin, not flat on the boat. That'd be a mess. So you have to work with a wet edge everywhere. If it's 80 degrees, you'd better have 2 or 3 people working on one person, 2 people spreading and 1 person mixing, I think, or maybe even 4, 2 teams. Then it would be okay to work in 80 degrees, but otherwise try to keep it cooler. If you're doing it by yourself, keep it cooler. Okay, so now, we have to get to work now. Let's get our sandpaper on. This is half a sheet. The full sheet is 8.5 by 11 or roughly, and this is pretty much unused, so either side will be fine. And we'll show you wet sanding. I don't think you need to see the whole job done, but we'll show you how it goes. It really is quite pleasant, and then we'll finish it off and come back when it's finished. Okay, so there are different ways to do it. I am going to wear gloves for this. There's nothing toxic about it, but it's kind of nice. Maybe just one glove. Kind of nice to keep your hands dry so they don't get all pruned. Okay, so here's one of our vinyl gloves and our bucket of water. Oh, let me first show you. I'm going to first show you what we're working at, getting out. I think probably the area we got one of the heavier accumulations of resin is right in here. And if we can get the light right, you'll be able to see it. Now there's really no problem with this. You know, it's not really going to slow the boat down much. It's going to be hard to see this because it's really not a major problem, but some sort of beginnings of sags. I don't know if you can see that or not. I'm having trouble seeing it in the screen. Where you've just got a little bit more resin than you really want. There, now you can see some of that irregularity right in through here. There's a little sag right there, but not bad. You could leave it like this and not sand it and recoat it. But there, now you can see it up here a little bit. There we go. See that up there? We're going to sand that till it's perfectly smooth, and then we'll put a surface coat on, a very thin surface coat to make that glossy again, and it'll come out perfectly smooth. So not really an issue as far as the boat's performance, but you know, it'll be a little faster with a perfectly smooth finish, and it's kind of fun to do actually. So probably worth taking the extra time to do the wet sanding and the final coat. Although, as I say, if you're one of the impatient builders that wanted to get it built really quickly, not to worry about it. Okay, so let's see how this is going to go. Actually, I've done the front. I've done from here to the back end. That's the back end of the boat. So I've done that part, and so we'll start right about here. Okay, so bucket of water, just regular water. Dip the sandpaper in and start sanding. Use plenty of water. And then it's by touch, whether you've done enough or not. Remember, you're going to sand, you're going to cut a lot faster on the curve, right on the curve. So don't sand through on the curve. On the flat surfaces, you're not going to sand through, you're not likely to sand through. But on the curved surface, don't be too aggressive. And again, the only way really to tell is by feel. Yeah, that feels nice. You can just a little more right there. Nice, okay, good. Need a little more right here. Nice, good. Need a little more right here. Nice, that feels very smooth now. So that's what we're looking for, something feels smooth to the touch. You're in great shape. Okay, good. And then the next stage, we'll be wiping this off and doing a visual inspection. Take a towel, just some old towel, and we probably won't do this stage until we've done the rest of the boat though. But I just want to show you what's coming. So we'll wipe this off, dry, and then we'll take some 120. Oh, this was 120 wet dry sandpaper. So now we'll take some 120 regular dry sandpaper. I'm not going to use the wet sandpaper dry because it clogs it up and it's more expensive. So, so even though this is the same grit, it's worth switching to dry sandpaper so you don't mess up your wet sandpaper. Now we're checking visually, and there's a little bit of gloss right here, and I can feel it too. Not quite as smooth as the rest. So I can just take that off so I have an even matte finish everywhere. There. Oh, no glossy spots. The glossy spots are depressions. A little bit right there. But overall, it looks very good. It's very regular and even. A little bit right here. Yeah, I can show you. This isn't bad, I can keep using it, but it's already getting a little bit clogged up, right up in here. So I could use a wire brush and clean that off, or else I can just keep using this paper till it's all clogged and then switch sandpaper. But, and a little dust, I guess I was, well, made me cough. You want to do as much as possible with the wet sanding because it's just so much easier than the dry sanding. But this is a good way to finish off because you can visually inspect and see where you might have some low spots. Okay, so that's what we'll be doing. And then pretty soon we'll be onto the deck. That'll be exciting. And I think I told you about the water test. Very successful, floated beautifully. Had to be a little bit tentative and because there wasn't any deck on the back at all, and just a cardboard mock-up deck on the bow. So didn't want to go out in the deep part of the river, but it sure felt great. So we're gonna have a terrific boat. Okay, let's get this cleaned up, and then we'll go on. Next step. Hopefully we'll get some more warm weather, and we'll do the final gloss coat. We could do that after we put the deck on, but it's just so easy to do this kind of work upside down because the boat sits so nicely without the deck on, just sitting level on the sawhorses. Okay, so carry on. We have the whole thing sanded with the 120 wet sanding, and then we've gone over it with the 120 dry paper. Looks like this, production paper. And now we'll go over it one more time, or well, 2 more times. I'm going to use, you could jump right to a pretty fine grit, like this 280, 220 would be adequate for the final sanding. The 120 is a little bit coarse. You'll still have scratch marks that the varnish will not fill in so easily. So you probably want to end up with at least 220 grit, but we're going to go 280. If I jump from 120 to 280, that's okay, but it's more work. It's going to end up being more sanding, more work, more time than if we go to an intermediate. So we're going to go from the 120 wet sanding to this 180. I think you see that? 180 grit, and then we'll go up to the 280 grit. There, wet sanding. So that'll give us a real smooth surface and for varnishing. And but a couple of notes while we're still on the sandpaper. One question, good question, thank you for asking. How many sheets of sandpaper do you need? One sheet of the 120 wet sanding paper is probably plenty. A full sheet. We cut the full sheet in half. And then we get, so a full sheet gives us 4 of these surfaces. So one full sheet of 120 for the wet sanding probably is plenty. And likewise for the 180 and the 280. On the production paper, the 120, you might want as many as 3 sheets of this because it clogs up so fast that once it's clogged up, it really just doesn't do anything. On the 120 wet sanding, it doesn't clog up, and it looks, it sort of looks brand new, but it actually does get dull. So when you find it's just not cutting as fast, turn the page, flip the sandpaper over, or if you use both sides, put a new piece on. Because it's just a lot more work sanding with dull sandpaper, and then you won't get the results. Probably won't be patient enough to keep sanding enough to get the results you want. Okay, now a couple of other comments. One, be careful of the center line here, where the 2 halves of the plywood meet each other, 2 halves of the boat meet each other. If you sand very much at all right on that center line, you'll cut right through the cloth because all the pressure is just on a very narrow area. In fact, I really avoided sanding that at all with the 120, and I probably won't sand down the center line until I get to the 280, and then I still will be very careful because even with the 280 I could cut right through. That thin cloth. So in fact, you probably don't want to ever sand right upright on it. Just sand a little bit this way and a little bit from this angle, rather than ever sanding right down the middle. If you want to sand down the middle, do it with a small piece of sandpaper in your hand, okay, rather than the block. That way your hand will conform a little bit to the shape and you won't cut right through instantly. The other place to be careful is right along the joint between the cedar strips and the plywood. If you have any hard spots in that joint, don't sand through the fiberglass cloth there. Typically it should just be a real smooth transition with no hard spots. You shouldn't be able to feel a ridge there where it changes. But if there is a ridge, it's not going to affect the boat, but you don't want to sand through there. Okay, a couple of other points. You see this? Further back you can see it. Right along the carbon fiber tube, the fiberglass cloth where we sliced it off when it was still green, that fiberglass cloth is probably kind of a sharp edge. So this is a really good time with your 120 grit sandpaper, the wet sanding paper, to smooth that out. It just takes a couple of strokes to cut through that edge and smooth it out. But we don't want a real knife edge along there. So let's hit that. And then the same at the bow and the stern. Let me turn you this way a little bit so you can see the bow. Same at the bow and the stern, where lost that one. Where the two pieces of fiberglass cloth came together like this. Inevitably there would be a sharp edge there after trimming it, and so you just want to clean that up on both sides, make it even on both sides, round it just a little bit. But again, if you start sanding aggressively down the front, don't sand right through. Now you may find, like on my boat, here's a little bit of sort of a gap here where it's just a real small, like a 1/16 of an inch, but I put my fingernail right in it there. I'm not going to sand that out because I don't want to go through the bare wood and have to coat, and have the bare wood exposed. But we'll come back and fill that later with epoxy, so not to worry about any irregularities along the. Here's another one right here, a very small one, and another one down here. So not to worry about irregularities like that. Now, if you're in the habit of being super critical of your own work, that's fine. But this is the time to be really critical now, not later, because later, after you put the varnish on, you don't want to be too critical, because that's the way it's going to be. So this is the time now. If you're going to look at your boat really carefully, do it now, because you can sand anything out. And feel it carefully, and pretty nice shape. Feels good. Rubbing your hand over should feel really good, really smooth and everything. So this is the time to be critical now, while you can sand things out. Now, the one thing that I wouldn't worry about is if one plank is a little bit low someplace, and there's a little bit of a dip where that plank is set in just a little bit further than the other planks. I would not try to sand that out, because probably you'll sand right through the fiberglass cloth on either side of that if you're trying to sand it all the way flush. And the water flow is going to be along the boat lengthwise, lined up with the planking. So a little depression in one plank or another place, in the plank, will really not be a factor, and it really won't be visible. What I would really focus on is any vertical, like drips or sags or runs, where you have things that are going to be crushing the water flow, like epoxy sags that will be crushing the water flow. I'd be pretty careful to sand those out, and make sure you don't have, as you run your hand lengthwise along the boat, that you don't have, ribbles that your hand is sliding over and you feel them. So you want those to be smooth. The water flow, is this much boat is in the water. At the bow, as you slice through the water, you're probably going to have a bow wake that, so a lot of the bow is going to be in the water as you slice through waves. So probably want to get the bow pretty smooth. As you work farther back, the last 1.5 or 2 inches up near the gunnel is really not going to affect your paddling much. Occasionally water will slap up there, but it's not going to be in the water flow. And so that really doesn't have to be quite as smooth. And you'll probably find, like on my boat, that the smoother areas of the cloth are, across the bottom and most of the way down the side. And as you get right down to the gunnel, cloth that's the hardest area to make the cloth lay entirely flat, because you've got excess cloth there. And hopefully you didn't get any wrinkles or folds over, but even if you did, it's okay. But hopefully you got it to lay flat, but it may not be quite as flat right along the last 2 inches before the gunnel. And I wouldn't worry about that part. I sand it smooth, but I think at this point we're trying not to sand through the cloth. So it's kind of a balance. You want to sand your boat smooth, but you don't want to sand through the cloth. The more sanding you do, the lighter your boat gets, so that's a plus. So it's kind of, and one point I did want to make is high gloss varnish is going to show everything. So it doesn't cover up anything. If you want to cover things up, you have to use a matte varnish or satin finish varnish. That won't show any irregularities, but high gloss varnish, you'll see everything. So get it as good as you want now, and then you'll be happy at the end. Be critical now, be happy at the end, and don't be too critical at the end. Okay, so there we go. We're going to switch to our 180 and go over the entire boat again, wet sanding with the same bucket of water. Probably get a new bucket of water. That bucket's getting kind of white in color. And so we'll go over it with 180, and then we'll go over it with the 280. And those will be really pretty quick sanding jobs. We really don't switch sandpaper if you're not happy with the smoothness. Don't switch sandpaper now, because you're going to find that the 180 and the 280 don't cut through epoxy nearly as fast as the 120. So make sure you've got, with those other grits, all you're doing is taking out the scratches from the 120. And again, just a reminder, I think we've mentioned this before, all of your sanding should always be lengthwise with the grain. You don't want to have created any crust scratches with your 120, because crust scratches across the grain will show up, and you can sand them out, but they're a lot harder to sand out with the 180, and really may not sand out at all with 280 because it's such fine paper. So throughout all your sanding, sometimes it's tempting to go up and down, but don't do it. Just go lengthwise always. And that applies to all of your sanding on any kind of woodworking project, unless you're just trying to hog off a lot of wood. And then sometimes when you're trying to move 1/8 of an inch of wood or 1/4 of an inch of wood, you might resort to sanding across the grain with a power sander just to move a whole lot of wood. But when you get closer to where your final shape is supposed to be, then you definitely start sanding with the grain again. Okay, so looking great and fun sanding it, such beautiful shape, and we'll see you soon. Okay, on to 180 and then 280. Okay, so this is the final bit of this segment, and then we have the boat beautifully prepared. We'll actually go ahead and work on the deck, and when we've got the deck finished, we'll come back and varnish the bottom. We want to have plenty of time for the bottom to dry in case there's any place where water has gotten in a little minute crack or anything. We'd rather have that that area filled with varnish rather than water. So we won't go ahead and varnish it till, I'd say I would wait a good week of fairly warm weather before varnishing it. So if you're in a big rush and want to varnish it before doing the deck, or you do the deck really quickly, get the boat out in a warm place, maybe out in direct sunlight for a few hours, and then you should be fine. But the last couple of details, remember we said we'd come back and sand this last ridge line where the two halves of the boat join with by hand, because our fingers will deform. Unlike the block, our fingers will deform so we don't have point pressure right on the ridge. And then, very important, we'll finish off with a bucket full of clean water and a clean sponge and a clean towel, and go over the entire boat with clean water. One of the effects of wet sanding is it leaves the boat coated with a very, very thin layer of what might be compared to a very inexpensive, very cheap water-soluble paint surface. It's not like loose powder anymore, which is what you get with dry sanding. You've got actually a coating on there, and we want to get all that off, because that water-soluble cheap paint is not what you want under your varnish. The varnish will start to lift off. So we want to be very careful that we get all of the wet sanding coating off before we finish up this step. So we use a fair amount of water and a sponge and a nice dry, clean towel. But first we'll do the sanding the peak, and you'll see this goes really quick. I like these ends of the sandpaper. There's the paper I used for the sides. This is the last grit, the 280. And I'm going to use the, make sure it's 280, yes. I'm just going to use the end, which is brand new sandpaper. It's just been up in the sanding block. So this will go very quick. Okay, now we've got a clean towel, clean sponge, clean water in the bucket, and we're going to make sure we get this boat super clean. Okay, so we'll have a good surface for our varnish to adhere to. It's important that you keep rinsing your sponge, or else you're just spreading the coating instead of taking it off. Okay, so just do a fairly small area and then hit it with the clean towel. And dry it off very thoroughly at this stage. You want all of that surface coating off. Okay. I'll use plenty of water. You can do this outside if you don't want to get water on your floor, but make sure you use plenty of water. Or else put plastic down or towels down. Don't skimp on the water at this stage. Okay. Okay, so I'll just finish up. I'll wash off the rest of the boat really thoroughly, and then we'll call it a night. We've got the boat looking beautiful, and yeah, very exciting. Can't wait to get the deck on and go for our first paddle. It's going to be super. Okay, thanks a lot for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon. Dry, all clean, looking gorgeous, and I gotta tell you, this thing is so incredibly light. It weighs nothing. It is the essence of a super light but very strong construction. You're going to love it. Okay, lightest kayak in the world, I think. Weighs nothing. Okay, good night. Good job. Well done. Okay, here we are, and we have our deck pieces ready. We've sanded them very lightly to get the bumps off the edge, just with, that was a 220 that we used. I like this silicone carbide sandpaper, the white, but any 220 grit sandpaper would work fine. And we just went over, took the fuzz off, and the bumps off where it was tabbed into the sheet. The bumps that hold it together in the sheet while we're cutting it out. Here we are. I went ahead and did this without showing you, but this was a pretty simple step, and I'll explain it now. I've coated the underside, the bottom side of the decks with epoxy, a thin coat of clear epoxy. This is just to keep the underside from getting, absorbing water and all, so it's just a very thin protective barrier. I don't think you want to do a real thick, remember epoxy is heavier than wood, twice as heavy as wood, so I don't think you want to do a real thick coating because you're just adding unnecessary weight here. So the tools, actually I didn't use the sandpaper or the pliers for this. The tools were just the mixing pot and the brush and a squeegee. So this is a good time to use one of the squeegees in the kit, and just gets it a little bit thinner than you can get it with the brush. So the process is, there's several ways to do it. You can just brush it on and then squeegee over it, or I'll often pour sort of a zigzag, snake-like pattern on, just pouring out of the pot, and then squeegee it out. That works fine. And you can see that around the edges I've left about 3/8 of an inch of uncoated wood, because then we'll be coating, when we're gluing the deck in place, we'll be gluing to bare wood. And again, also down the center line you can see that 3/8 of an inch on either side, because we'll be using that bare wood to glue the two halves of the deck together where they meet in a peaked fashion. You can't glue them together now because they're flat, and when they're on the boat they'll be peaked up, meeting in the middle in sort of a V shape. Okay, so I think that covers this step. Pretty simple. And I came back most of the way, but not to the very back tip, because we can coat that easily right beside the cockpit. So this is the bottom side of the deck. Make sure you're coating the bottom side of the deck, not the top of the deck. And that should do it. Okay. See you soon back in the boat shop. Okay. Okay, here we are back again. We're just cutting strips of, this is 1.5 inch tape, about 1.5 inches, 1.25 inch probably okay. A wider tape is slightly better here than narrow tape, but if you have 1 inch tape that'll probably work. And we're going to be using this tape to hold the deck in place while we get super glue spots on it, and then we'll put it on with epoxy. We'll go back over it with epoxy and we'll have the deck on. That's 12 strips, that should do it. You see a fairly slightly wider tape than some of the blue tapes. Okay, and we've already taped the deck together. A little hard to see those tapes, so you can see them okay down the center line here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tapes, and that can be done with the deck halves lying flat, touching in the middle, and then tape across. The ideal is that when you fold the deck into its peaked shape, that the two halves, one isn't overlapping the other side, that they're meeting exactly together like so, rather than overlapping one way or the other. Okay, but we'll deal with that later. Okay, now these blue strips of blue fabric are important. Any kind of fabric is fine. Of course, color is not an issue here. These will go underneath the deck from side to side, so when we want to lift the deck, it's easy to push the deck down into place when we're getting ready to super glue it in place, but it's hard to lift it up. So these will go from side to side, and we can lift up and get the edge of the deck up to the position we want it in because of these strips. Otherwise, you can initially you can reach underneath where you can reach, but up in the front sections it'll be very hard to reach underneath. There are 5 of these strips, which should be more than we need really, but we'll use them. So just slide these back underneath the deck. Try not to get a wrinkle in them. Try not to get a twist in the strip, because when we finish with the super glue and have the deck in place, we'll want to pull these strips out. And they want to be a little bit extra long, or else you're going to lose them. You'll lose one end. I have some that are a little bit longer, so we'll use those towards the back where it's wider. And pretty thin. You don't want a heavy canvas here. You want something pretty thin that won't take up any space. So it won't hold the deck away from the edge of the boat at all. Four strips. This is the fourth strip here, actually. And we'll save the last one and put it in right at the very front of the boat. Okay. An even amount on each side so you don't lose one end of it. And here at the front. That should do it. Okay, now we'll start at the bow. And let's move up there so we can see it a little bit more clearly. We'll start at the bow with positioning the deck, because that's the determinant factor of how far forwards we want the deck to be relative to the boat. So let's get even closer here, so you can see exactly what we're doing. Okay, there we are, right at the bow of the boat. Remember, this is the front of the boat, not the back. Don't get confused and put your bow deck on the back of the boat. How can you tell the difference? The front flares out more than the back. The sides are fairly almost vertical where they meet. And in the front flares out, so it's going to throw the water out to the sides instead of having the water come up over the deck as you paddle through waves. So that'll keep you a lot drier. Okay, now at the front, I think you can see that fairly well. You see how these ends, these tips are a little rounded off here? Well, that's because at the very front, we're going to put a short loop of nylon webbing that'll be glued into the bow of the boat. And that's so you can grab hold of it there. So we need to leave a little space there for that webbing. So we want to come back from the inside meeting point of the two carbon fiber tubes, not the very tip of the boat, but the inside the boat where the two carbon fiber tubes come together, right in the V there. We want to come back from there 3/4 of an inch, and that's where those rounded tips will land. And then we'll have a 3/4 of an inch wide handle there, webbing handle. Okay, and we've got all our tape cut, so that's convenient. Let's get some tape on starting up here so we have the forward and aft position of the deck defined there while we have it in the right place. Okay, now the tape is going to hold things in place, approximately, but it's not going to be very precise. So as we do the super glue, we will be positioning the deck exactly the way we want it for its final position. So the tape is just, whoops, these first few pieces are a little bit awkward because there's not much holding the deck yet. Okay, you might rub them on a little bit more firmly. With the tape, anytime you rub it on, if you rub it on too firmly, it's hard to get off. Okay, and let's get some on back here. Now we're moving way back to the back, coming back in here, and we'll get enough to hold it in place back here. Once it's up, being held up and not wanting to all fall down the bottom of the boat, it's much easier. Okay, there we go. Now, as far as positioning, how are we positioning the deck relative to the carbon fiber tube along the shear line? Well, we want the deck to be just slightly below the top edge of the carbon fiber tube. We don't want the deck to be flush with the top edge. We want it to come in so there's a dip of about 1/8 of an inch, a little less than 1/8 of an inch, probably 3/32 of an inch dip where the deck meets that carbon fiber tube, because then we're going to fill that dip with epoxy. Now you can see here I can still reach up inside and push the deck up into place. There. Now it's going to be pretty hard to see such a small dip with the camera, but if I run my finger down here, it hits, you're not going to see a thing there. Okay, that'll help. If I run my finger down the deck, it hits the carbon fiber tube and goes up over it and then down. So there's going to be a bit of a dip in here, a little valley between the wood and the carbon fiber tube, and that's where we'll be filling with epoxy. Epoxy will just sit in that little dip, and that'll glue the deck onto the carbon fiber tube. Back when we were initially using our carbon fiber tubes, remember we sanded the outside surface, so that that surface is still sanded, so we should get good adhesion with the epoxy. So there we go. Once you get to this stage, it's fairly easy to apply your tapes, and because the deck's not tending to fall down inside the boat so much. Okay, and here we want to bring this edge up just a little bit. So we'll use our ribbon. Now, in this case, I'm going to have to tape the ribbon on this side. Okay. And it does help sometimes to rub the tape on with a fingernail if it's not holding as well. Okay, so you can see what we've done here. We've taped, a little hard with the light, but we've brought our ribbon down the side there. See the ribbon right here, fabric? We brought it down the side and we've taped it down here. That way we can pull on the other side and lift the deck. If you have two people working, you may not need to use the tape on the ribbons, but that tape works quite easily. Okay, and up here, let's see what we can do just pulling on the two sides, because we want both sides up a little bit. I'll get tape for both sides here. Okay, now we'll see if we can do this single-handed there. Okay, that's good there. Remember, this tape is just to get the deck in place relatively well so we can put super glue on the super glue dots. Okay, if you can see that okay. So that worked pretty well, where we pulled up both sides of the deck, holding both sides of the ribbon, and then just pushed the tape on. Here, this side looks good. I'm going to tape my ribbon on that side, on the far side, and pull up on this side. And figured we might need a little bit more pieces, a few more pieces of tape. And indeed, we are going to need a couple more. We're just using our last piece of tape now. So we'll probably need 4 more pieces of tape. Okay, and we're pulling this up on this side, inside the, just to get it up inside the carbon fiber tube. There we go. And get this back down here. Okay, a few more pieces of tape towards the back, and then we've got the deck mostly in place. Keep your peak meeting nicely. Okay. Now, remember, a boat is sort of a dynamic thing. As soon as you're building with wood, you're working with a dynamic material that has its own properties, and every piece of wood has slightly different properties. So each boat is going to be very similar, but might have very small differences in the shear shape. So typically the deck will fit on quite nicely, and you'll be able to pull the boat shape to meet the deck and along the edge nicely. But if you're finding that your boat and your deck aren't exactly right for each other, it's very easy to sand a little bit off the edge of the deck in a certain area. But it's best and probably easiest if you can just bring your boat to the edge of your boat is flexible, so if you can bring the edge of your boat in. For instance, back here, let me show you where we're working here. Back here, the edge of the boat seems, appears to be too far out for the deck, but with just gentle pressure, we're able to make the two meet just nicely there. Okay, so the deck actually does perform the purpose of holding the boat shape the way we want it. So don't be too quick to think you need to sand part of your deck curve differently. Best if you can just bring the boat to fit the deck. Okay, and then the last bit back there on the other side, we'll get that done, and then we'll be ready. This is not terribly difficult because you're not working against time or resin setting up or anything, but it's a little bit fiddly trying to get everything taped in place, especially initially when things are not very well controlled. But when you get to this stage, then it goes fairly quickly and easily, and everything works. Okay, now we'll be going back along and putting spots of super glue about every 4 inches, 4 or 5 inches, wherever we feel we need it, to hold that deck exactly in place, lined up just the way we want it. Now I'm a little concerned that you're going to have a hard time seeing how much of a dip there is right here between the deck and the carbon fiber tube. We can try getting a low angle shot and see if that clarifies it. But even still, it may be a little hard to tell. But remember, you just want enough of a valley in there that the epoxy will sit in there and reach into the deck about almost half an inch, between 1/4 of an inch and half an inch into the deck, and then sit flush with the top of the carbon fiber tube. So we're coming in at a lower angle here, but it's still going to be a little bit tricky to see exactly how much of a groove there is there. This is one area that video doesn't work quite as well on, but here, I'll run my finger down here and see if that helps. Don't want to have a shadow. So here's the finger, and then up over the edge there. So dip right here and then up over the tube. And here you can see with the tape, maybe the tape makes it more obvious. It goes down a bit of a valley right here and then up over the tube. That's probably going to want to be down just a little bit more, right like that. Okay, anyway, that'll give you a bit of an idea of what you're aiming for. Then it's just a matter of making it happen. Okay, which shouldn't be too hard. Okay, let's get set back up here. And we'll try this angle from in front now for a little bit. And see what we can do. Okay, you have a couple of ways of controlling what you're doing here as far as the deck fitting the hull. The amount of peak, if there's more, sorry about that, if there's more peak to the deck is a little narrower. If the deck is flatter, it's wider. So up towards the bow, it's more peaked up here than it is back here, or more peaked towards the cockpit than it is right up near the front of the bow. Okay, so here we go. Let's go up a little bit. And there we are. Okay. So let's start with our super glue. I think we're going to go back down this way a little bit and start with our super glue right in the middle of the deck. And so we'll zoom in here so we can see a bit better. Okay. There. So that should be a good place. We'll start right in here and then work forwards and work back. Okay, so we have our 2P10 and our activator right here handy. And now my 2P10, this actually might be helpful for you. You want to be fairly meticulous about cleaning it off every time you use it, cleaning the top of the nozzle off every time so you don't get too much buildup. But eventually you may find that your cap doesn't go on very well anymore. So what I do is I put a little nail right in the top there once the cap stops working as well as it should, and then with pliers you can pull that nail out quite easily. Okay. So we have this set just right, just the way we want it, just a bit of a groove right there. So let's start right here with a dot of super glue. Okay, so I'm making about a 3/4 inch long strip of super glue there. And let's hit that with the activator. Let that go off. And we're just right here as well, so let's keep going. And this is about 4 inches back from my first dot, and I'm going to go again back here because that's exactly right. And this I'm going to pull up a teensy bit here. And that looks pretty nice. Okay. Go right here. Don't glue your ribbons in place. Okay. Let's hit those with the activator. Now as we go forwards, I'm going to want to pull the deck up a little bit here, even here. So I'm not going to put my super glue on there yet. I'm going to let these set just a little bit longer, then I'll bring the deck up just a little bit and then keep working forwards there. Now back here, the deck's a little bit too high, so I'm going to let these set up and then I'll push the deck down a little bit and hit it with super glue. Let's see about the other side, see if we can start on the other side without disrupting our first side. Leave your super glue long enough to set up, or else you're going to find that you've got a bit of a problem. Okay, so let's find a place on this side where we think the positioning is right. I would say right about here, it's just right. And this is pretty good as we go back, we'll see. But let's get a dot right here and hold it in place right there. Okay, again, it's not just a dot, I'm saying a dot, but it's actually about 3/4 of an inch of surface that we're covering, and then hit that. We're also really, well, we're really quite good all the way back to here, so let's go ahead and secure this. Yeah, that feels really nice there. Just the right position, bit of a groove for the epoxy to sit in, but not too deep a valley. Okay, now that's the last one I can do there because back farther, the deck's a little bit high. So let's lock it in place here, 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 and here. And then we'll let those set up and we'll then move on back. Okay, now let's come back to the first side. So here we are here. And we'll pull back a little bit so you can see better. We've got our spots of super glue. Let's zoom in so you can see those a little bit better. There they are. See those 4 spots of super glue there. And now we'll position the deck. I'll stay zoomed in so you can see what we're doing better. The deck, as we come back, is a little bit too high here. So we're going to want to get the deck, let's see if this is dry now. Yes, that's all set up. Because if I push the deck down here, it might go down here as well if that weren't set. May even still break that super glue bond, but we'll see if we can get it without disturbing that bond. If that, okay, there, that's just right. We've got the groove and everything. Let's hit it there. It just wants to pull up, so I'm going to have to hold this one while the super glue sets, because it wants to pull up above the deck surface. Okay. We got the actuator on those. Okay, we'll let those get set first before we do anything too drastic. These I'm actually having to hold the deck because it wants to pop up over that carbon fiber tube. So I'm having to hold the deck down in these for these two while they set. Okay, that should hold it. But I'm not going to keep working here. Here I have to push it down a little bit more. So I want that set up a little bit more. So I'm going to go up to the work forwards now and leave those a few minutes longer to get set. And I'll work forwards up in here. Oh, one of the things you do want to watch for, you don't want a gap between the plywood and the carbon fiber tube. You want them to be tight. If there's too big a gap there, the epoxy resin is not going to sit in that valley. It's going to run down through the gap and run down inside the boat. So where necessary, this last one, just while I was talking, I realized there's a bit more of a gap between the wood and the carbon fiber tube. So before that's set up completely, I was pushing it together, holding it together. Whoops, we're zoomed in so close I don't think you can really quite see that. So let me show how I was doing that there. So on this last one I was pushing from both sides, pushing the carbon fiber tube up tight against the edge of the deck. And that looks like that's a fairly tight gap now. Okay. And I might put one more spot right in here. This is a bit of a big jump there. So let's just put a little dot right there. Not going to do very much there, but a little bit. And a little splash of activator. Okay. And then, well, now these are probably pretty well set. Yeah, so let's keep going back here. So we'll move along back here. Here, I'm going to push it down just a little bit. There, that's taking a fair amount of force there. That's okay. The super glue should hold it fine. And so that's about right. And this one I'll probably have to hold in place as well. So you can see this is not an instant process getting the deck on, but it's not very difficult either. Okay. Oops, not quite yet. Okay, that's Don't let go too soon. Okay, I think that gives you the idea of how this goes. So why don't I do work along the deck a little bit farther, and then we'll get back to you very shortly here. So just keep more of the same. And I think you've seen the whole process as far as getting the deck initially tacked in place. And then we'll be back with you when we're ready to do the epoxy. I thought it'd be helpful to show you one more thing with the tape, with the fabric pieces underneath the deck. We've worked all the way along this side, from the very back edge of the deck up to this point here. Now we're down a little bit in here, and I don't actually have any of this, these ribbons right underneath here, but we were able to get this secured just right here, and it's secured right over here. So now let's untape the ribbon here from the bottom of the boat, and we're going to slide the ribbon forwards and then retape it, and I'll show you. That's probably about right in there. Let's try it right here. Show you how this can work. Doesn't really matter which side you've got it taped on. I can lift this side or this side. To lift this side, I just pull at a low angle on the other side, and it'll pop that up there. So that's good. That's just about right here. Let's come up just a little bit more there at the edge. And that's looking pretty. We're down just a bit here though. So let's try this ribbon, see if we can lift it up just a little bit more up in there. Okay. Come on, pop it up. There we go. Okay. Now we'll get a dot here, then we'll push this down and put a dot there. So this is just right here, and then that'll go back down. Yep, perfect. Okay. So that gives an idea of how, you know, how easy it is to work with. But without those ribbons underneath, it would be pretty hard to get the deck to pop up when you wanted it up higher. Okay, so that's just right, and then let's just get that one secured now. It's fine to just do one dot at a time wherever you think there's going to be an issue with positioning it correctly. So we'll get this one, and then we'll move forwards and do one in here. And we're moving along nicely, and we have the other side, not quite as far along, but a good start on the other side as well. Okay, now we can do this one up here easily. And we'll want to push down just a little bit here so we have a bit more of a valley here. Okay, that, whoops. And then the spritz. After the spritzer, you only have a second to get that in position. Well, if you're familiar with this stuff. I'm using quite a bit. Just got down just a little bit more than I wanted, so let's come back up just a bit. There, that feels just right. That's nice. Okay, that's set up. And then we'll move on forwards. One of the things we've been watching, we've kept this peak fairly well aligned as we went. If you got a real disalignment there, or a big overlap, then your angles of the boat, of the deck where it meets the carbon fiber tube would not be quite correct. So you do want to keep that deck aligned quite nicely, meeting at the ridge line here. Okay, and we're down just a little bit here, so we'll come up just a bit and then get that. Let's get this up here. There. Oops. Okay, we may put a dot here and then work back. It's okay to work forwards and back at the same time. But you don't really need to rush on this part of the project. You can really take your time and get it just the way you want it. Okay, so we're going to come up a little bit here, get a dot, then we'll work back and get, well, we might be able to get that dot at the same time. So we taped this ribbon on the back side here, so I can just pull this way and lift the deck on this side. Get this middle line aligned here if I can. Okay, there we go. Because that's nice to have the deck pushed out against the carbon fiber tube correctly. Oops, I lost it again. Okay, there. That in position, and I think we're good here. And here. Get a spritz on there, and we're good. Now this is looking quite good right along here too. So we'll get a dot right here. That's that. Then we can work back from there. Okay, so our starboard side is almost all in place. And our port side is pretty well secured, just not ready, not quite finished. Okay, and there we are. Okay, good. I think you've seen enough of that, and we'll finish that up, and then we'll come back when we're ready to do the epoxy. Okay, talk to you soon. Bye. Okay, now we have the deck mostly secure, but we haven't done anything along the ridge line yet, and as we finalize the deck, we're finding the ridge line wants to skid a little bit and overlap itself more. So let's do a little super glue work right along the ridge line there, and so position those so they meet perfectly, and then just a small dot there to start with. And let's see, they're meeting just right here, so let's do a small dot here. And then we'll position the rest and get it secured as well. Spritz those. Okay. Now in here, this side's a little high and this side's low. Up here, it's, this side's low and this side's high. So we'll position those as soon as these first two dots set. And get those secure. Just a little pause here. For this part, we'll be able to reach underneath. Okay, we can probably do that now. We're going to reach right inside the boat and get that positioned exactly the way we want it. That's pretty nice there. Okay, that looks good. Okay, so let's hit that. Shouldn't take too much along this ridge line. This is like about 8 inches apart from the last one. Okay, and that looks good there. I think we can do this one while I hold the other one. That's good there. Okay, now we have to work up here a little bit more. This is a little tricky in that it's hard to reach in there. So let's see if we can get a fingernail in there. That works, okay. Get it up as high as you need it. Okay, before you let it go. And a little bit higher. You get an X-Acto knife. Now you probably remember these knives from Dan Newland's video on building the T-37. This is the Olfa knife. There you can see the brand name there, Olfa. And they're very nice. They have this ratcheting locking system here. And so you can extend the blade just a little bit or a little bit more, and it has breakaway blades, of course. So the big thing about these is the blade is very stable in there because of the metal casing that it slides out of, as opposed to sliding out of plastic casing. So quite a bit of difference between these and the cheap plastic ones. Okay, and that works just right there. See how we got the knife blade in between the two and then aligned them just the way we wanted. Whoops, lost it there. Okay, that's it there. Nice, that's just perfect. Okay, so hope you could see that on the screen, but that worked really nicely with the knife blade. A lot better tool than using your fingernail. Okay, and we'll secure this along here. Quite well lined up, all of this here. Now, when we got that one place, it all fell into place. So we'll get almost right to the bow there. Okay. Oopsie. And there we go. Okay, doing great. Now we have the deck in place. Super glue every about 4 inches, 4 or 5 inches, about 3/4 inch little dots of super glue, and everything's set up. Now we're ready to pull our ribbons out and take the tape off. So that's the last step there. And then we'll move ahead and get ready for the epoxy. We'll do a light sanding. We could have sanded this before we started to put it in place, but that's okay. We can sand it now just about as easily. And these ribbons should slide right out as long as you didn't get super glue on them. And you can save them for your next kayak. So when you build your second one, you have ribbons ready. Okay. Remember, on most of these ribbons, I did end up taping them on one side to the hull, so I could just work them from one side, and that worked quite nicely. There were a few that I didn't tape, like these aren't taped on either side, and that works okay too. So 2 different systems there. Okay, we'll get the tape off. All this tape, just peel it off gently, and we'll get that off and see you soon. Okay, got all the tape off, got the ribbons out, and real quick sanding. This is 220 grit. This is the silicone carbide sandpaper, and it works real nicely, but any 220 grit will work fine. And we're just going over it once lightly before we do the epoxy work. And you can hit your super glue spots. Sometimes they have some rough barbs sticking up. Any place where things aren't smooth. Now this is the top edge of the fiberglass cloth from the hull. Take that off a little bit more. That's smoothed off. So just a little bit once over, making sure everything's ready for epoxy. Things are a little bit delicate still at this point since the epoxy's not on, just the super glue. So we're not pressing very hard on this in this sanding, just keeping it light and quick. Okay, here we are. Can you hear anything out there? This next part, we're going to be using a new powder. Let's take that off. Maybe you can hear me. This next step, we're going to be using a colloidal silica powder. This is the West System 406 additive. And here it is. You can get small containers of this as well. This is the strongest additive as far as strength of the final mixture when it sets up. But it's a powdered glass. It's a silica, and it's very, very light, and it floats around in a room for an extended period of time, and you do not want to breathe it. So we don't like to use this on very many applications. We've used it a little bit before, and so you know a little bit about it, but I want to remind you that you don't want to breathe this. Once it's mixed up, it's fairly, it's not going to be as hazardous. Although you do still want to be careful of the sanding dust, but it's in the raw form that it's most hazardous. So let's be very careful of it, and that's hence the mask again. And another option is take the silica out, so take your resin outside, mix your resin and your hardener. Remember to put the hardener in. If you forget the hardener, you'll have a sticky mess for the next ever. It never sets up. So resin, hardener, same ratio as ever. And then add your silica powder, and that can be done outside. You can add your silica powder outside where a gentle breeze will just move any powder that's in the air away from you. A strong wind will not work very well though. You'll have silica powder will come flying out of the container all over. So let's do this now. Oh, what are we doing? A little that helps to know what we're about to do or trying to achieve. So we're going to do several things now. Before coating the deck with clear resin, we're going to, let's take a look down here. Look right down here. Now this will be, once we're actually working on this, we'll move the camera inside the boat so you can see better. But here we are, the edge of the deck along here, as far forwards as we can reach. On the inside, we'll be doing a silica fillet, epoxy fillet, right along between the underside of the deck and the inside of the hull. We'll be doing that with the spoon, just placing the epoxy approximately where we want it, and then running the spoon along underneath there. So the spoon, this is as if this were under the deck. The spoon will make a fillet that's very nice and even underneath the deck, between the deck and the hull. And then we'll do the same here in the front, and we'll come forwards again about as far as we can reach. And first we'll clear coat. Same along here, we'll clear coat first with the clear resin. Then we'll place the thickened resin, and we'll show you how to mix that. We'll run the spoon along and make a nice fillet. Here between the two halves in the middle, as far forward as we can reach, we'll run a fillet along there as well. And then we're going to add a piece, an 18-inch piece of fiberglass, 1-inch fiberglass tape there as well. And then we'll go back over the tape with clear resin to make sure the tape is saturated. So that will make this area where the loads around the cockpit are much higher than the loads up front. So that'll make this area around the cockpit quite a bit stronger. And then the loads up front will, later on, we'll take some clear resin and make sure it's quite liquid, and we'll just tip the boat, pour the small amount of clear resin in, and let it run forwards on each side and down the middle line. So that'll secure those areas, but it won't be as strong as where we've done the fillets, of course. And then on the outside too, we have this little reservoir where the epoxy is going to fill. This little groove here where the epoxy is going to fill, and that'll secure it on the outside. Okay, so now I think we're ready to start mixing. We'll mix our clear first, and here you can see all our supplies. If we've got you aimed right, yeah, I think that should work. Actually, we've got a few things that we don't need on here, I suppose. But down this end, we have a fair amount of space, and we'll be mixing the clear first. So I don't need the mask yet. And this is for underneath the deck. And let's start with 4 large marks of clear resin. And then we'll add 4 small marks of hardener. There was just a teensy bit of air in there, but it wasn't enough to throw up our mixture. You could hear the air squirt out there at the end, but that shouldn't affect our mixture at all. Okay, and hardener. So 4 small marks of hardener. Now, I'm going to go ahead and, just because of moving the camera around, I mean, it's not hard, but I think this will be a little more efficient. It's quite cool in the shop here. Today it's, I'd say 57 or so, maybe 60 degrees at the most. So I can do this without any problem. I'm going to go ahead and mix the silica mixture at the same time, and then so you can see it in the camera, because that mixture I want you to see exactly how it's done for this application, because we're doing it an upside down fillet. We need that fillet to stay in place. If it's sagging, it'll all end up in the bottom of the boat, and that won't do us any good at all. So I want to show you mixing the silica before we move the camera into the boat, so you can see spreading, coating and spreading at that stage. So if it's a warm, you know, typically I would just urge you to do your clear epoxy first, and then come back out and mix your silica as a separate step. Don't do them both together, because that'll cut your time down quite a bit. Cut the time of the working time down quite a bit if you have your silica already mixed. Okay, so that's two full syringes of the clear resin. In other words, 8 large marks. So we need 8 small marks of hardener. Almost put it in the wrong one. Okay. So 8 small marks of hardener. We use the same brush for mixing. Okay. Now, the trick with the silica is we want it absolutely no sag at all. If there's any sag in this mixture of silica, we're going to have a big problem, because it's going to run right down the sides of the boat and make a mess and not add any strength where we want the strength. So absolutely no sag, but we don't want it dry and stiff. We want it creamy and smooth still. So we're aiming for mayonnaise-like consistency, or Dairy Queen ice cream, or, you know, even peanut butter. Peanut butter is a little stiffer sometimes than what we want. A Jiffy peanut butter maybe. But Dairy Queen ice cream or mayonnaise is a good comparison. Okay, and here's our silica powder. And just to set a good example, even though it's hard to talk, we're going to get the mask on and do our silica powder. Okay, now here we are. Cool. So we have 2 fairly heaping teaspoons, plastic spoons of silica powder in here, stirring very slowly and gently at first, and then faster. Okay, let's look at that. A little too much sag there. Too much sag. Okay? Here's another spoon quite full. Oops. And this is looking pretty thick. This is looking like it may just be right. Okay. Absolutely no sag, and yet creamy smooth is what we want. Okay, now let's see. Oh, we still got some sag. Oops. Still got some sag there. So we'll go with half a spoon now. Okay, so this much more. It's half a spoon. Okay. Let's see what that does. See if we got what we need. That's looking pretty good now. Let's see what it's like. Okay, that's a pretty big blob. And it's staying pretty still. Barely moving. Okay, it's starting to sag a teensy bit. Okay, so a teensy bit more. Now that's about a quarter of a spoon now. It's hard to see the white against the white spoon, I know. And there is some... Okay. There is some powder that I'm seeing in the air. So I'm glad to have the mask on. There, now look at that. That's pretty nice. I think we can live with that. Oh, well, it's still moving. Let's do another quarter. Okay, that was another quarter spoon. Okay. Okay, now let's see. Now that looks good. Okay, mask off. That looks good. See how that's a big blob. Still creamy and smooth, but it's staying pretty darn still. And that's a really big blob. We're going to be doing a smaller fillet than that. So I think we're going to be in pretty good shape there with that. Okay, let's work with that. Okay, now we have to work quickly because I've got both the clear and the silica mixed up, and so I don't have much time because that's a big batch of silica. 8 marks is quite a lot. And so I got to throw you into the boat here so you can see what's happening. And then I've got to get this spread fairly quickly. Whoops. Okay. And here we are. I think you'll be able to see okay what's happening, hopefully. Okay, now you're down inside the boat. Just to orient you, this is paper that I've spread on the bottom of the boat to catch any drips. This is where the two, this is underneath the deck, where the two halves of the deck come together right along here, the center line, and then working back along the edges here and along the edges here. And so let's get going. Okay, remember, you've just mixed up the clear now. You haven't mixed up the silica mixture. Now, it's a question of how long your arms are. Go on forward, as far forwards as you can reach there. And this is the clear that we're putting on here. And this is getting a little bit... This is a little thicker than maybe yours is, hopefully. A little thinner might be better, but this will work. The thinner will saturate the wood better is all. But this is not too thick. It will be okay here. This is a combination of timing and being slightly cooler in the shop, which gave me more time, but the resin's thicker because it's cooler. Also, the resin's thicker because it's started to set up a little bit, so combination there. Okay, so bring that back there. Okay, it looks pretty good. So we coated the uncoated wood that we had before. I'm probably in your way as far as visibility, but I have to get in here. And again, we'll go as far forwards as we can on this. Without a camera in the way, it's probably easier to get further forward, so that'll work. Okay. Oh shoot. Just lost a big drip down under my paper, not on top of the paper. Oh well. Get that cleaned up. I thought I might have too much on the brush there. Okay. A little hard working upside down like this. fortunately. That's the only time we need to do this on this project. And it's good to, good to have paper towel readily available so you can clean this up quickly and easily. And gloves. Gloves are definitely a good plan here. By the time we finish, this could get a little sticky. So I want to make sure I get it all up, because I don't want to end up with my paper stuck to my boat on the inside. Okay, I think that's pretty clean. Coming back now. Rather than move the camera, I'll just tell you I'm just coming back farther back along the edge all the way to the back corner here. Okay, good. We'll dip up there, we'll get that. Okay, there in front, get a little bit farther forward for me. Okay, now other side. And this 4 marks of clear is going to be just the right amount. Okay. Okay, everything coated successfully. Now, and that used up essentially all of the clear that we'd mixed up, the 4 marks. Now we have the 8 marks of silica, and we're going to start along the sides and just do our fillet as far forwards as we'll be able to reach with the spoon, just placing the silica mixture in there. And then we'll smooth it out and clean it up afterwards with the spoon as soon as we get it placed. Working, if it's warm, you better be working quickly here. Try not to be too messy though. Okay, almost ready for the spoon there. See, just like mayonnaise, spreads awfully easily. So if you can make a turkey sandwich, you can build the kayak. No problem. And remember, nobody can really see this ever, so your reputation as a fine builder will not be affected by whether this is super neat or not, because it is definitely a little bit awkward working upside down here. Now you can see that this is just the right mixture. It's creamy and smooth, but it's not sagging. At least not yet. Hopefully it won't start sagging. Should be just right when we get the fillets on there. Okay. Let's go with that. And then we'll come back all the way. Okay, and that's as far as I can reach, just right. If you use the tip of the spoon, it creates a slightly smaller fillet. If you use the flat of the spoon, it's a bigger fillet. So you can kind of adjust it that way. Okay, and that looks pretty good. One thing with epoxy, get it good enough and then leave it. You keep working it, sometimes you get your best fillet right off. If you keep working it as it sets up especially, it gets harder and harder to work, and you'll end up with a job that's not as good as if you just left it. So I think that fillet looks pretty nice. And now we're going to try to clean off some of the excess along the edges here. And again, a little hard to get in there.
But there, you can see we're scraping off a lot of the excess there. Oops. The trick is not to mess up your fillet as you clean up the edges. I did hit my fillet a little bit here. Okay. Now I can drag over that one more time, see if we clean it up a little bit more. Okay, that's looking even better. Okay, that's real nice. Okay, a little more cleanup with this brush now. And I can just, I don't know if you can see, yeah, you can see that. Just scrape it off on the spoon, the excess, and then get back in the pot when you need to. You don't want any sharp barbs under here, because you'll catch your feet on them or something, or tear, you know. You just want it all to be smooth, that's the big thing. No sharp edges. We're going to have plenty of strength. You can see that's a pretty nice clean fillet now, and in front of that we'll use liquid epoxy. After we've done the outside, we'll use liquid epoxy and let it run forwards, and that'll get that coated. And now I'm just going to work back farther back along this side where you can't see, and then we'll come back and together we'll do the center line, and then you will have seen with the fiberglass tape, then you will have seen it all. Okay, so we'll be back on in just a minute here. Now for the really tricky area. Okay, on this side, I have a bit of an advantage because I can actually see in the viewfinder, or in the screen, what I've done. Not a bad idea to do something like that, except the camera gets in my way. Okay, so I'm just going to do it blind. I can't really see what I'm doing here at all. Let's see what we got, how much of a mess we've made. Stuff falling down on the paper and stuff. Okay. Oh, I mixed up another batch of 6 large marks of clear resin with 6 small marks of hardener. You can see the paper is important here. I haven't got it far enough forward, have I? I'm missing some. Okay. Let's hit that with a spoon and see if we can smooth it out a bit. Yes, that looks fairly nice there now. Just need to clean up along the edges, and should have had my paper further forward, shouldn't I? It's a little blop on the bottom of the boat that'll clean up, and then we'll get the fiberglass cloth up there and coat that with clear, and we'll have a pretty good job here. So anytime you spill, in fact, I'm going to clean this up, and then I'm going to put a paper towel over it so I don't get sticky, because once you get it, you start getting sticky, it gets all over the place, and everything gets sticky. It's amazing stuff. Sticky factor. So this is probably the best learning part of the video, just seeing how to work with epoxy as far as keeping neat, not getting it all over, because you don't want to get it on your skin or develop an allergic reaction or whatever. Along the edges, I'm especially anxious not to have any sharp barbs. That's the big thing. Okay, you have to be a little careful with the edge of your deck. As you lean in, you don't want to break your seals. Your joints where you just have the super glue holding your deck in place. And try not to get your hair in the epoxy. That's always a bit messy. Now we'll get our fiberglass tape in place. We'll try not to get epoxy on your deck at this stage. Okay, and here's our fiberglass tape. And I'm going to start it at the back, because I know I want it to come all the way to the back, and then run it forwards. Trying to center it. It's going to be a little tricky to skid it sideways too much. Not impossible, but I'd rather have it in position correctly to start with. It's just the trouble is being able to see is hard. Okay, now strip down here, and I think we can get this up in place. It doesn't do really any good if it's not on the joint. Okay, yeah, looks good. Okay, now we'll hit it with some clear. You have to mix that up. And see if we can straighten that out just a little bit. It's got a little bit of a warble to it. Okay, right in here. Pull it sideways. No, I think, well, yeah, there. Push it sideways. It works best. Then pull it. End up in here. Yeah, I'm going to run my glove right along the edge and take off any sort of bumps of epoxy there. Okay. That looks smoother now. Don't want these threads of fiberglass sticking out, so try to get those subdued. Sticking down. Okay. There's a thread or something. Okay. Yeah, that looks smooth now. Okay, don't get too much. Can you see this? Right here in the V, try to keep that cleaned out. Okay. Now it's time for new gloves, and we're going to mix up, let's see, how much do we need? We're going to mix up a small batch of clear just to coat that ribbon with the clear. The silica mixture won't really saturate the fiberglass cloth correctly. And so we'll be back in just a minute. That'll be, we're just going to do, we'll do two large marks of clear. We don't need that much, but then we can use it in the silica mixture we do along this edge. Okay, so back in a minute with 2 large marks of clear mixed up. Okay, here's the clear. 2 large marks of clear, and we're just going over the fiberglass cloth and filling the weave of the fiberglass cloth with clear resin. And with the fiberglass cloth, as long as it's white, it's probably not filled. Oops. It should turn sort of a clear color when it's filled. Okay, you gotta push the front back down now. Brush that up a little bit. My mistake. Now that looks good. There, nice. That does it. As good as I can get it, and plenty good enough. Okay, no sharp barbs, that's one of our goals. And having the fiberglass cloth centered as it runs forwards on this joint. And that's it. And having the fiberglass cloth saturated. Let's center it a little bit more up here. At some point you just got to say that's good. Okay, I think that's it. Okay, leave it alone. No more. Okay, now to finish up, I'll just be doing the fillet along this side here, and just, you know, along this port side, just like we did this fillet on the starboard side, and then we'll have it taken care of. Oh, now this is important. Look at my fillet on the starboard side. I should be better than this, but look at the fillet on the starboard side here. We got a bit of a sag right in here, so that part's not doing anything. Let's get that back up and fill in. So most of it looks really good. Somehow that one place just sagged a little bit. So that's one of the key things with epoxy, is never walk away from it and say, hey, I'm finished. Keep rechecking it, because something like this is really easy to fix while it's still wet. So I'm glad that happened. Looks like the mixture I had was maybe just a little bit too, not quite thick enough. Needed just a teensy bit more silica powder in it, but most of it looks really good. So I'm not displeased with it at all. But that's the key part of working with epoxy, is check it after 5 minutes, check it after 10 minutes, and check it after half an hour. After half an hour, if everything looks good, I think you're going to be safe. Okay, everything else looks great. Really nice. Okay, so we'll just do the second side, and then we're ready to coat the deck after that. Okay, see you soon. Bye. Okay, just a quick note, paper towels right here, just showing my tools. The scissors I used, I had one strand of, I should clean those off. I had one strand of fiberglass that was hanging down. A strand, you can't pull at it, it'll unravel the whole cloth. And sometimes you can get it stick back up in place so it's not hanging down, but you don't want a sharp tail of fiberglass strand hanging down. So for me, in that situation, the easiest thing was to get a nice pair of sharp scissors and snip it off, clean the scissors off, and then we'll be fine. And now, here, let's see our setup here. You can see we've got the light up there. That was very helpful, having the light. I put a thin piece of plywood underneath the light so we wouldn't get the bottom of the boat too hot. So that's protecting the bottom of the boat, that plywood under the light. And that helped a lot with that last step, and it also will be important in the next step on the deck when we get up there. I'll explain that in a minute. But now come back here, and while just a quick aside here, while we have the thickened resin mixed up, on that second side, I used up the resin that I had left over from doing the center line of the deck, and mixed 4 additional marks, large marks of resin, and 4 small marks of hardener with this, and then with the silica mix added in. So 4 was enough to finish off the second side. So I came out pretty even at the end. But now there's just a little bit left. We can use whatever we have left to fill in the jagged edges along the top of the Kevlar cloth. That can be nice to smooth it out a little bit. So it's a good time to do that. And a new set of gloves here. I've used probably 3 sets of gloves in this operation. You can wipe your gloves off. You really can't use acetone on these gloves, it'll dissolve them. So you can wipe them off with dry paper towels. But it's sometimes, if you're working quickly, it's just faster and easier to strip a pair of gloves off, a sticky pair inside out, so the stickiness is now inside the glove, and then put on a new pair of gloves. So we've done that several times. And here's all the resin we have left right there. You can just see that blob on the side. Anyway, this is very quick and easy, just filling in the top edge of the Kevlar where it might be a little bit jagged, or where it might catch dirt and stuff like that and get messy. I don't want to disturb my fillet there. Okay, so just smoothing right over those rough edges. I'm going to do that across the bottom too, since I've got more left over here. And I'll take care of those edges. Remember, we'll be getting in and out of this with muddy fees and stuff like that. So the fewer places where dirt and mud can get caught or accumulate, the better. And you might think, oh, why not just sand this Kevlar? Kevlar doesn't sand. It is really tough stuff. It kind of burrs up, just kind of fuzzes up instead of sanding. So I mean, it's not impossible to sand it a bit, but then you have to coat it and stuff. So this is kind of a lazy way to clean up these edges. if it's real sharp sandpaper and fairly fine, like 220 grit, you can smooth out Kevlar a bit, but it's not readily sandable. It's about the hardest material to get a sanded finish on. Anyway, so this is going to work fine. I don't know, can you see? Yeah, you can see where I'm working now. Okay. I'm getting a little bit short to finish up with all of this, but I can revisit that here in a few minutes because I'm going to be mixing up a little bit more of this. So anytime you can catch the last of this. Okay, and I haven't done the front edge. That might be nice too. Okay, now let's refocus forwards and look where we're at. So now we're ready to coat the deck, and although this doesn't have to be done at the same time, there are some small advantages to doing it at the same time. I do want to check these super glue. Oh, I just put my fingers in the fillet underneath. Okay, so you can benefit from my mistakes. Clean that up a little bit. There we go. No real harm, just a little sticky. Okay, so any place the super glue is bumped up, this is probably the best time to smooth it down a little bit. Doesn't have to be exactly perfect, but if there's a really noticeable bump, just hit it with sandpaper quickly. Take that off. And we're going to be coating the deck with clear. Oh, that's just a bit of a, okay, that's good. There's a bit of a bump here. And that'll work well. And then we're going to let the clear accumulate in this little trough that we created here. And that'll reinforce the deck to hull joint. So essentially we'll keep the boat exactly level when we're doing it. And that'll take little wedges underneath on each side. And so we'll have a flat of epoxy right across here, and the same on the other side, and then a thin coat up the deck. Now the only problem with that is anywhere that there's a slight gap between this, all this is fine, we filled that all in with thickened underneath, but anywhere there's a slight gap between the plywood and the carbon fiber tube, if it's enough of a gap for the resin to run through and keep flowing through, then you're not going to be successful in getting a little bridge across here of clear resin. So that's why the light is important at this point. So you want to go along the edge looking for gaps where light is coming through more than elsewhere. So this is all pretty good along here. I don't see any light, right? Okay, so hopefully it's focused. Okay. Ooh, there. You see the light coming through there? See if we can get the angle right. See, I see light starting right here about, there's a little bit of light there. I don't know if that'll be a problem or not. But anyway, maybe from here forwards, maybe from here forwards, there's a bit of light coming through. And then, whoa, look up here at the bow. See that area? We've got quite a bit of light coming through there. And of course at the very front, that's just open. We're not worried about that. And same going around the other side, same on this side. I'm seeing light coming through there. It's a little harder to see it there. You can see the light there. And then it stops pretty quick. Well, there's a bit, no, actually there's a bit of a gap through here. Okay, it stops right about here. Okay, so in those areas, that'll be a bit of a problem for the clear epoxy to sit in that trough that we created. In fact, it won't be willing to. It'll run right through. So the trick is to fill from the surface this area just with a very thin line right in the crack of the thickened epoxy. We don't want it to build up though on the wood because it won't blend with the wood color. It'll be white. If you're going to paint your deck, that's fine. You don't even have to worry about it. No problem. But if we want to leave the option open for leaving the deck clear, which can be attractive, then we have to deal with this, and don't want a lot of white silica on top of the wood. So the trick, if we fill with silica first and then wipe it off, even if we wipe it off quite thoroughly, what will have happened is the silica will have partly penetrated the wood, and when wood gets penetrated with any kind of moisture, water, or epoxy, whatever, changes color depending on how much penetration there's been. The more penetration, the darker the color. So we will have penetrated the wood with the silica mixture, but not very deep because the silica mixture is thick and doesn't penetrate very well. So then if we wipe that off and we come back and coat with clear, those areas, the clear will penetrate deeper and turn darker. So those areas where we had the silica that touched the wood will be slightly lighter color and not blend in perfectly. So to solve that problem, what we'll do is coat the entire deck with clear, and then we'll come back and fill with silica along the edge and wipe off any excess silica, so it's just in the joint, just enough to create a dam for the epoxy, for the clear epoxy. And then we'll come back with clear again and get that smooth sort of bridge across here between the top of the carbon fiber tube and the wooden deck. And that should do it. Maybe it sounds complicated. It's really not very complicated or very difficult. So it should go quite quickly. First thing though is to take the rock out of the boat. Take the tippiness out with wedges. And because we need the boat to be almost perfectly level, so we get an even bridge across here and across here, both horizontal. So that's going to be the first thing, get your boat level. And then we will coat the deck with clear, and then we'll do the silica, and then we'll add more clear along the edges. Okay, that looks good. Nice and level. I'll leave the level in place there so I can keep checking it during the process. Okay, and clear epoxy now for coating. Now this time you don't want a lot of silica in this because it'll make the clear coating a little cloudier. So let's clean the silica off. You can use the same brush if it's still soft. But we're going to clean the silica off and make sure there's not much silica in the mixing pot either. I'm going to use the paper towel in the mixing pot actually. Of course there's no conflict as far as the setting up properly and everything. It's just the silica is white and will make your mixture a little bit cloudy. So try not to have any silica, any significant amount of silica in this mixture. Okay. Now we're ready. And we're going to go for 8 large marks of clear resin. And that should get us pretty far along here actually. We went ahead with the deck because that's pretty straightforward. And we've coated it with resin and then squeegeed the resin and till the resin's quite thin. Most of it's, what was in the wood grain is great, but what was on the surface, most of that came off. And we're squeegeeing it out, and that's great. That'll be light and fast and easy to carry. So we're looking real good. When you squeegee it, you'll find that micro bubbles get up in the resin, and that often turns it a cloudy color. So the squeegee part, you probably what you squeegee off, you probably just want to put it back in your container, back in your mixing pot, and leave it there, and not use it to fill along the edge, or else you'll have sort of a milky white fill along the edge. So now we're just about finished. What we found was that despite it looking like there was enough gap here for the resin to go through, that it wasn't running through. So we, in this case, we've not had to have not had to fill with a thickened mixture along the edge at the front where we saw the light coming through. So that's great, that saved a step. But if you do have the resin just wanting to wick through and run down into the hull, make sure you go ahead and fill any places where that's happening with a thickened mixture just down in the crack, and then go over it with the clear to form your sort of bridge across to the deck. So we're just finishing up with the bridge. There are a few things I wanted to show you about that. So the technique is just, I think we can zoom in a little bit here and you can see a bit better. Let's try going in a little closer. Okay. Let's see. We'll go right up in here. So technique is just to kind of lay the resin right in along there. This is just the clear, and just kind of lay it in, and it's going to be more or less self-leveling. Oh, one note, this will save a lot of work if you put a blue tape, a fairly wide blue tape. Again, this is like 1.5 inch wide blue tape along the edge, because you're going to get some epoxy dribbles down. The trick then is to catch it before it runs over the blue tape and onto the hull. So we're just kind of laying this in right along here, trying to get it fairly even, but it's just going to be somewhat self-leveling, so we're not having to work too hard at it. And then another trick, after it's sat there for a few minutes and started maybe a very little bit into its partial cure, you'll probably see, in most cases, you'll see little bubbles on the surface. And at that point, you dry your brush as much as possible, maybe wipe it on a paper towel even, to get the resin out of your brush. And then you just drag your brush very lightly. Sorry, I was just trying to get out a hair there. Drag your brush very lightly over the surface, and that'll take the bubbles out. You don't want the brush to catch in it and disrupt the surface, but just a very light touch. Okay, I'm going to need a little bit more here. The filling along the edge takes a moderate amount of resin, so you don't want to short it. I wonder if we can see, if we get the light right, maybe you can see how that fill looks when it's level. See along there, let's zoom in on that a little bit. Maybe you can see. See, that part looks pretty nice there. You see the fill level right across to the black carbon fiber tubes. Okay, well this is going well. Oh, another point, as much as possible, and I've not been too precise about it, as much as possible leave a little bare wood, 1/4 of an inch, 3/8 of an inch, right along the edge of the cockpit where we're going to be attaching the combing, so we get epoxy to wood instead of epoxy to epoxy for attaching the combing. And along the center line, you want to work epoxy into that joint along the center line, right along the crest there, as much as possible, so that's filled in from the top. And so the final little bit here, I have a little bit up here, you can see where my fill along the edge stops, and there I'm short there, there's no fill along the edge there. So I'll fill in, and this is what we just did up here, that fill. So I'll fill in that last little bit, and then we're pretty much done. I think you want to take that epoxy off the surface of the wood as much as possible. It's going to be much easier to sand this thin coat of epoxy and then really build up a finish with varnish. Varnish is much easier to get a good clear coat on than epoxy. And also varnish is lighter. We'll end up with a real light boat. If you put a whole lot of epoxy, a thick layer of epoxy on the wood, you're going to double the weight of that bow deck. The wood is half the weight of epoxy per cubic foot. So let's not build up a lot of epoxy on top of the wood, because that just defeats the purpose of keeping the boat really light and easy to carry and fun to paddle. Okay, well I think that you shouldn't have any trouble with this step. now being so proficient at everything with epoxy. There's my level back there, and I was checking that occasionally and make sure my boat stayed level, so my fill of epoxy on each side right up against the carbon fiber tube was going to stay flat and equal on both sides. So that pretty much covers it, I think. So that step should go really smoothly. Do check, again, it's like epoxy work, don't just do it and leave it. Check along the tape, and you'll probably find places where the epoxy is running down the tape and just about to run onto the hull. Catch it with paper towels and wipe it up so it doesn't get on your hull. And the last note, it's going to be a lot easier to get that tape off if you pull it off before the epoxy is set up hard. So depending on the temperature, when the epoxy is starting to set up but still pretty soft, and you don't anticipate any more epoxy running down from the side and onto the tape, that's the time to pull the tape off. If you let the epoxy set up hard, you're going to have tape encaptured under the epoxy, and that'll be hard to get off. Another approach would be to wipe off, and see, I do have drips coming right down in here. Another approach would be to wipe off the tape really thoroughly before, let's zoom back so you can see those drips. Whoops, there's one more. Here we go. So there are drips coming down in here that are almost over the tape. I'm catching them just in time here. Another approach to taking the tape off will be to wipe the top edge really thoroughly so it's not encaptured under epoxy. But that's not as good as just waiting till the right moment and then taking the tape off entirely, because you'll still find there are little bits of tape caught under epoxy even if you wipe it off pretty thoroughly. So take the tape off before the epoxy is set up hard, but after it's stopped moving, after it's stopped running and dripping. Okay, I think that covers it. You know as much as I do. Okay, have a nice evening. And our next step, looking ahead, gosh, we're moving fast. Next step is to put in the coaming and then the back rest, and then we'll be on to putting a few coats of varnish on, and then after the varnish we'll be on to putting the attaching the back deck, the film, fancy film that we're using for the back deck. And then we'll be paddling, and you'll love it. Okay, I'm excited. We'll see you soon. Bye. Just come back to pull off the tape, and I want to make the point that timing is definitely important in this. I think that view is, with the light, is not quite right, so let's get a slightly different angle. Getting too much glare. Maybe this will work better. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, I think you can see maybe a bit better. So now, if you leave this tape on until the next day, you can see how much epoxy ran down over the sides, and it was running down onto the hull. And we caught it most places. A few places we had to wipe it off the hull, but that was easy while it was still wet. But easiest if it stays on the tape. Now, one thought about putting on tape is, if your top edge of the tape isn't tight, epoxy is going to run down behind it and it won't do any good. So I want to make sure that the top edge, let's just turn this just a little bit. I want to make sure the top edge of the tape, spill this off, the top edge of the tape is tight. However, you just really need the top quarter inch or half inch of the tape to be tight against the boat. The bottom edge, if it's loose, is actually an advantage, because if the bottom edge is sticking out away from the boat a little bit, any epoxy that runs down won't get on the hull. It might drip off onto the floor. That might maybe prefer it to get on the hull, I don't know. Anyway, make sure the top edge of the tape is tight, at least. Okay, and now
Look at that. See, that's sticky. It sticks to my finger. My finger sticks there, but it doesn't come off on my finger. My finger is clean. It's not wet, but it's definitely sticky still. If I push hard enough and hold my finger in there against it, it'll come off on my finger, and I'll, get my finger sticky. But this is perfect. It's still tacky, but it's not going to flow at all. And now let's take the tape off. If we don't take the tape off now, and this epoxy all sets up, you can see the top part of the tape is going to be have epoxy that's flowed over the edge, and it's going to be underneath the epoxy that's dried. And it'll be very hard to get the tape off then. We'll have lots of little pieces of blue tape left behind as we pull it off. And you'll end up doing a fair amount of work sanding and getting off the little piece of blue tape. So timing is really important here as far as saving yourself work. Okay, and let's pull it off. And you can see it's just coming off really nicely, and it's not, the edge of the tape isn't ripping and leaving pieces on the boat or anything. So that's what we're trying for. Again, if I tip this, you get a little bit better light. Okay, there we go. See how nicely that pulls off and leaves a real clean, sharp edge. Okay, and there we are, almost off. Okay, now I have something else to show you. Okay, so pulling it off at this stage is still kind of sticky with epoxy, so it's kind of messy. Okay, okay, now remember we were somewhat concerned, or we noticed that at the very front along here, let's get a little bit closer in, at the very front along here, we were seeing light coming from the inside through, and we were wondering if we'd actually be able to get the clear epoxy to stay in that gap. And we were pretty successful, and it looked like it was going to stay on the surface and fill that sort of valley initially, but as epoxy does, it doesn't always stay where you put it, and it did run through. However, it left a seal all the way along. So we do have a seal, and now this stuff's still sticky, so we'll have a great bond. And so now we'll go back and fill right along on top. And now, since the stuff that we put on initially is still sticky, but it's partially set, now what we put on top will stay on top. So looking inside the boat, there are some drips up at the front end of the boat, and we probably added maybe an ounce of weight or half an ounce of weight of unnecessary epoxy that won't do anything to benefit us, but not to worry too much about that. However, when we saw these where there was a bigger gap along here on both sides, if we had coated everything with clear first, a light coating with clear, and then used a thickened mixture, pushing it down in the gap, and then cleaned off the surface so we wouldn't have white on the surface, and then done our clear, we wouldn't have to go back now and fill again. Okay, but that's a simple process and no real harm done. But you might, I think probably next time, I'm always trying the easiest way first, but I think next time I'd probably find it was easier just to use a little silica in that gap to fill the gap. And then you don't have to let the silica dry or go set off or anything. You can go right over the silica right away with the clear, and the silica thickened mixture will keep the clear from sinking down through that gap. Okay, but very successful, and very exciting to have our deck on now, and the boat is looking splendid, and so we're very pleased with what we've gotten done. Okay, and
I don't think you need to see filling that crack especially. It's just, or it's not even a crack anymore. It's just that little dip where we want to level it off. And farther back, to check farther back, here's one other place where it looks like we had some of the resins not filled. Looks like it ran down into the hull. Having just talked about the tape, I'm going to retape the areas. I didn't want to leave the old tape on. I knew I was going to redo this part. I didn't want to leave the old tape on because that initial resin would have gotten set too far along to get the tape off while this new batch of resin was starting to set. Okay, and if you're wondering how long should you wait to pull that tape off, there's really no way to give you a time. If it's warm and a warm day, it might be as fast as half an hour. If it's really warm, it might be 20 minutes. Pull your tape off in 20 minutes. But in this temperature, it's probably only in the high 50s now. It's gotten cooler. In this temperature, it's probably been 3 hours or so, and before it was ready to come off. The other thing is, remember when you're clear coating, and that's still sticky, but it's starting to set up. When you're clear coating these surfaces, make sure that the day is cooling off when you put the clear coat on, or else you'll get bubbles all over the surface. It'll bubble constantly. So again, a reminder that you want the air in the wood, in the cells of the wood, to be cooling off and sucking in, shrinking, rather than warming up and expanding and pushing out bubbles. Okay, we have a very, very nice surface here, no bubbles. And we'll build up a few coats of varnish and it'll look splendid, or if you're painting it, that works fine too, but the varnish will look very nice. And we did get a very nice fill all along the center line there. One of the advantages, you know, a really meticulous builder might be, in fact, you may have already done this because I didn't mention it before, but I didn't tell you to do it, so don't blame me. Really meticulous, and I considered this, but did not do it. A really meticulous builder, right where these two pieces come together, the peak, really meticulous builder might have wanted to sand those edges down at an angle so they meet perfectly with no V between them, no hollow space between them. My pieces are touching, but only at the bottom edge because I didn't sand that. Well, that's okay if you did that, but you probably don't have quite as strong a joint, because if you have those two pieces meeting perfectly, it's harder for the epoxy to get in between them. The way this is, they're touching at the bottom, but we've got sort of a V shape coming up where they join together for the hollow space for the epoxy to fill in. So that's why I didn't suggest that we sand those to make a perfect joint, because it would have been much harder for the epoxy to get into that joint. Whereas as it is, we've got very nice fill all along that joint. So it should be a very strong joint. So it should work well. Okay, I'm just going to fill along these edges, and then that wraps it up for tonight. Although I will have to get the tape off again at the right time, because I really don't enjoy having to sand through epoxy to try to get the tape off. But most of our fill looks really nice right along here where we have that level sort of lake or little pond of epoxy supporting the deck and going right across the level to the top of the level with the top of the carbon fiber tube. So it turned out very, very nicely that way. Okay, and this part, the amine blush doesn't form until the end. So if it's still sticky to the touch, still sticky when you touch your finger to it, you're going to have a great bond there. You don't have to worry about letting it set up and wiping it down with water or sanding it or anything like that. This will be a perfect bond. Okay? Okay, so I'm going to mix some epoxy and then we will see you soon. Very successful. I'm very pleased. It went very easily, very quickly, and turned out very neat. And the little strips of epoxy inside the front, nobody will ever see those. And I'll probably forget that that even happened after my second paddle. So, terrific job. Good morning. We have a deck on our boat. Looks great. Okay, let's weigh in. Let's see where we're at. Oh, still very light indeed. And, okay, on the scale, let's see if we can balance. There we go. And let's take a look. What are we at? Okay, ooh, that looks good. Just barely over 13 pounds. Let's zoom in so you can see that better. 13 pounds and 2.5 ounces. Pretty good. Let's add our other pieces and see where we're at. Okay, those pieces and the backrest. And now we're at 14 pounds, 3 ounces. Okay, so that's pretty nice. We like that. Okay, so let me show you the pieces we just added. So the looking forward to a little bit, the backrest pieces here, all 3 layers of that. The piece that goes behind the backrest, which goes like in there, and so that's the piece that goes behind the backrest, and then the combing pieces. So that gives us what we need. Okay, there we are. So, very successful with weight, looking really good. And this morning, a real quick job. We have some of our tools here. This is just purely for decorative purposes. And if you're going to paint, there we go. If you're going to paint your deck, instead of keep it clear, there's no need to do this step. In fact, you don't want to do this step. So we're just going to run a couple of veneer strips right down the center, butted up against each other, and that's purely decorative, so you can leave the step out if you want. To get ready for that, you want to get a real smooth, flat surface. Right along here, these 1/4-inch strips won't take up much space. So eventually we'll sand the whole deck. You can sand the whole deck now if you want. But right now I'm just going to sand where I need to for these 1/4-inch strips. So right along the center line. You may find that at this point before sanding, if you're getting really gummed up here on your sandpaper, that's because the amine blush that may have formed on the surface, and you may want to wipe it down with water first. Let's feel like this will fit. Not too bad, not too much so. If you find there's amine blush, you want to wipe it down with water first, or acetone. If you want to get it dry right away, use acetone, and that'll take the amine blush off, and then you won't gum up your sandpaper so fast. This is right there. This is sanding okay, but still not a real hard cure, so it's probably going to gum up my sandpaper more than is ideal. So we probably can get it good enough. Yeah, it's a little soft still. If it's mushing, this was in a fairly cold shop overnight. If it's getting kind of mushy and not sanding off as a powder, you're not ready yet. You don't want to sand it yet. Okay, so we'll get this ready, sand it up, and then we'll be back with those strips. I seem to have misplaced my strips, so I have to find them first. So these strips are going to be lined up like this, as a sort of stripe down the middle of the deck. It's a darker mahogany, and that'll look real nice. But again, if you're painting your deck, Don't put the strips on, no need for them. Just like so. And with a little varnish on there, those will stand out and give a bit of an accent. Okay, good morning. Welcome back. And the deck turned out just great. It is beautiful and just right. And the weight of the boat, 13 pounds, that is absolutely super. We're definitely going to be well under 20 pounds when we finish. That'll be the lightest wooden kayak that you can find. And make it fun to paddle, fun to carry, easy and fast to paddle because it's being so light. And so that's very exciting. And now this morning, we just have a couple of fast, first let me tell you about my hat. See that hat? I'm very proud of that. My daughter is just about to graduate from MIT, her 4th year in ocean engineering, which is a branch of mechanical engineering at MIT. So I'm proud to wear this hat. So let's see, this morning, a few really very fast, easy jobs. We're ready to put the trim on the top. These just very thin strips of mahogany, just as an accent right along the center line of the boat on the deck. We're not too worried about the amount of weight this is going to add. I think it's probably just a small fraction of an ounce. So well, a little concession to away from form being all structural and necessary into the field of art and just decorative trim. So you can leave that off, no problem at all. Maybe you just like the look of the deck, varnished wood without the trim. The trim will be, when it's varnished, will be a little darker, sort of an accent, so that can look nice. And if you plan on painting your deck, that's another option, no problem with painting it, if you like that look or feel. And any kind of graphics on the sides can be really attractive too. So a lot of options on the deck. If you're just going to do a straight, sort of elegant varnish job, the trim might enhance that a little bit. But a lot of this is time to kind of start thinking, what look do I want for my boat? Couple of thoughts about paint. If you do plan on painting the deck, a bright white can look very nice, but it can be glary in the sunlight and be a little hard on the eyes. It'd be right in front of you while you're paddling. That's one consideration. You're kind of looking over it and along it, so it's not as bright as if you're looking straight down at it. But might think about that, especially if you're down south, someplace where there is a lot of sunlight. Black would be very classy, striking, elegant. But black will get very hot, too hot to touch if, again, if you're down south. So if you're in southern climates, think carefully whether you want black or white, because black will be too hot, white might be too glary. So you might want something that's not so dark or so bright. Okay, a couple of thoughts there. Okay, now putting on the strips of veneer, pretty simple. The easiest way that I found to attach it is just little pins. I think on this we can go about 3 inches apart. The veneer looks pretty flat. Looks like it should lay on. You could go as close as 1 inch apart spacing for the pins. The key, and this is important, is not to have any voids underneath the veneer. If you have any empty space underneath the veneer, or if the bottom side of the veneer isn't coated and stuck down firmly to the deck, your veneer will expand and warp and lift off. If you have it glued down, it's never going to lift off. It's absolutely permanent, 100%. But if you have a space underneath, that veneer will buckle up a little bit and start to, not look flat anymore. Not a structural problem, obviously, but if you start to try to sand it flat, you'll sand through the veneer. So as much as possible, we want to get the veneer down flat and tight and make sure there are no voids underneath. Make sure there's no gap where there's no epoxy underneath. So you should have epoxy. Trick with epoxy, gluing, laminating two things together with epoxy. I think we've talked about this before, is
you should always have glue coming out the edge and clean that off. If there's no glue squeezing out from between the two surfaces, you probably have a void. You can pretty much count on having a void there. So make sure you have glue squeezing out from between the, from underneath the strip, and we'll scrape that off, we'll clean that up. Okay, the other thing we're going to do is over here on the table, and give you a quick preview of that as well. Here we are. And you know, I'm better prepared this morning than sometimes. I think I have all the tools I need, and cleaned off the table so I have a nice working surface. I even put cardboard down on the floor because I know I'm going to get some drips when I'm coating this edge. So what we'll be doing on this table is, oh well, first a very quick job. We'll just coat the bottom side. This is the piece that goes right behind the backrest. Backrest is here. This goes across the boat and supports the backrest slightly. And then the back deck film attaches across here as well and then runs back to the back of the boat. Okay, so we'll be coating the bottom side of this piece, and we won't get too close to the front edge. We'll stay about 3/8 of an inch back from the front edge because we'll want an epoxy to wood joint between the back of the seat, the backrest, and this piece. So we don't want to be coating, we'd rather coat onto bare wood when we do our glue joint than coating onto an epoxy surface. Either way works, but bare wood is best. Okay, so first step, we'll be coating along this edge because this is edge grain. Edge grain glues really well as long as it's fully saturated. If you just go over and stick something on it, go over it with epoxy, stick something on it right away, a lot of that epoxy is going to migrate in, be drawn into the wood grain, and you may leave a dry joint which won't be strong. So you don't want a dry joint. So we're going to coat this first with epoxy, let it sit in. While that's sinking in there, we'll go back over here to our decorative strips down the deck, and then we'll come back and we'll be gluing this, these cedar strakes, just like the same material as used on the hull. We'll be using these to glue along the top edge of this plywood piece. This is the splash guard combing around the cockpit that we'll be working with later as soon as this is set up. So we'll be gluing this centered right on that piece, and it's just kind of a decorative strip. Looks more elegant than seeing the edge of the plywood. Although again, if you're going to paint this, it also will give it a little stiffness sideways and reinforce it a little bit. If you're going to paint these, you probably don't need the cedar strip, but again, we're only adding about, well, I'd say that's about an ounce of weight, maybe an ounce and a half at the most. So very, very little additional weight here. And that's why we're using a cedar strip, not a harder wood, not a harder or heavier wood. Ultra lightweight, that's what we're going for, and that's what we're achieving. So it's going to be great. It's going to be super fun to paddle, I tell you. Can't wait. Looking forward to launching. It might just be about a week away if I don't get interrupted by other projects. So very exciting at this stage. Okay, so let's get our epoxy going. We'll be mixing clear resin and coating these, both of those, and doing the strips. We better mix up two large marks of resin. Okay, why don't I come back to you after we have those 2 large marks of clear resin mixed up, and we'll get started on the boat right here on the bow of the boat. I didn't think you needed to see the whole process of coating these edges, so I went ahead and coated the edge right to here. I coated both sides. Now a couple of things here. This is a plastic that epoxy won't stick to. Any clear polyethylene is fine, or black poly tarp material is fine. Poly sheet of plastic. Garbage bags will work. Any of these slippery plastics are fine. So, and then I have
these pieces hanging out over the edge of the table. If they were sitting on the table, I'd get a lot of epoxy wicking underneath and getting on the bottom, the back side of these, which I don't really want it on the back side, and a little weight to hold it. And so I find on a job like this that using the edge of the brush is probably the easiest rather than the tip of the brush. So just using the side of the brush to wipe the epoxy on. So you're not really doing it this way. Either way, whichever works best for you. But I like this technique. And we want a fairly heavy coating here because a lot of it's going to sink in. That's the whole point of it. It'll sink into that end grain and seal that end grain up. And then we'll get a terrific glue joint then because the epoxy will be attaching to the epoxy that's way deep into the wood grain. So there's no way we'll ever have any separation there. Okay, so just wanted to get that quickly. And now we'll go back over here with the same epoxy that we've got mixed up and work on these strips. In fact, we're pretty well zoomed in. Let's stay zoomed in. We'll start right at the bow here. Okay, that should give you a good view. Okay, and a little epoxy got on my brush. It's trouble with on the handle of the brush. That's trouble with holding a brush upside down as the epoxy runs down it. I did heat this epoxy a little bit because I wanted it to set off quickly so we can move on to the next step. I have other projects I can work on, but I'm most excited about working on this, so it'd be nice not to have to wait too long. So, so I cleaned the epoxy off of the handle with just wiped it off with a paper towel and wiped it off my gloves. So I'm not going to get everything I touch sticky. A new pair of gloves is another option. I've already done that once, so don't hesitate to rip off these gloves and put on a new pair. Much easier than getting everything sticky. Okay, lots of paper towels. Remember, you really can't, in epoxy work, you need a new paper towel each time. You can't reuse a paper towel because you automatically pick up the sticky part. It's a foregone conclusion. You're going to pick up, grab it, and grab the sticky part. Okay, now everything's clean again. Clean gloves, clean brush. The outside edge, the outside of the mixing container is still clean, otherwise I'd wipe that off. And we're ready to get going here. Okay, so let's see. Let's start by coating. The bottom side of the veneers. I'm going to try doing it right here on the boat. I may decide I want to do it on the table instead, but let's try this. This way any extra epoxy is going to get on the boat where I want it. Okay, so this is working pretty well here so far. Might get a little messy later on, but we'll see. Okay, so you get the idea. We're going to coat that all the way along the entire strip. That way we know that there's no bare wood. If we don't get, and we want to have this glued down solidly, but if somehow there's a little teensy void someplace, we know that the bottom side of this strip is coated with epoxy and will not be bare wood at least, so that'll stabilize it and we won't have so much problems with it. I'm probably going to get some epoxy on the top of this strip, but I'm trying not to. I don't really need epoxy on the top of it. We'll see. If it gets too much epoxy on the top, we'll probably coat the whole thing so we have a uniform color. But if it doesn't have much on it, we won't coat it. If there's a rougher edge, put it towards the middle. It won't show, rather than on the outside. If one edge of one of the strips has a few little nicks in it or something, put that edge towards the middle of the boat where the two strips join together, and it won't be very visible. You really won't notice it there. Okay, so this is going well. Okay, I'll coat both strips and then come back. Talk to you in a minute. Okay, I'm back already. Slight change of plans. I think this will just be a little easier as far as my working surface and working area. I'm going to glue on this first strip, or I'll put it in place first, and then I'll coat the back of the second strip. Just because this space is working well for my doing it right on the boat is working well, and that'll give me, but I can't do the second strip so easily with this strip in the way. So I want to make sure there's going to be, we want to make sure we're not short of resin along the crest where the two pieces join. So make sure you have that crest line well coated. Try not to get hairs in it from the brush. And this resin is just right now. It's very slightly thicker because I mixed up two, and now I've taken, a few minutes to do different jobs with this batch. So it's getting a little thicker, which is nice. It's not wanting to run down the deck. So that's making my job a little bit easier. So you start to, get a sense of timing on these jobs and how long the resin takes to start to thicken up and stuff. So try to keep it a fairly thin line, but not super. Don't have it come down the deck more than the width of the strip. Much more than, maybe a little bit more, but not much. But you do want a fair amount of epoxy here. Fairly thick coating, and then what squeezes out will clean up. If you're too thin a coat of epoxy, you're going to get a void someplace. Okay, and you see this is fairly thick. Now, see it's dripping, but not very fast. Okay, so that's because I warmed it up, and because I did a few other jobs first. And that's just what I wanted. The warming it up made it thinner right away, but made it start to set off faster. So by now it's a little bit thicker. That's seems like a bit of a, you warm it up to make it thinner, but then it gets thicker faster. Okay, a little sticky here. Lining up the front. Well, we'll be able to slide it pretty easily, I think. Now, let's line up the front. There we go. I don't know if you can see up there. So right at the bow is what I'm trying to get that lined up perfectly. And there we go. We can sand that to a bit of a round if we want later, but not a problem, not a big issue there. Okay, and we're just going to leave this sitting here for now because we want to get the other side on. And then we can push the two together and make sure we don't have any gaps in between them. Okay, so now we'll coat the back side of the second piece. Yeah, it'll look fine. Looks nice. Good. Again, we want to have this up where we want the epoxy if we get excess epoxy. And then we'll put this piece in place the same. We'll coat the back side of the second piece, and we'll coat along the deck, and then I'll be back and we'll get the two pieces attached, and then we'll clean up around them. Okay, now we have the second side coated. We did have to mix one more large mark of epoxy to coat the second side. We didn't have enough, and let's get that flipped over. We've coated the back side of the strip, of the mahogany strip, and we've coated the deck right up alongside the other strip. Okay, and we'll slide that back into place. Now, see how nice that looks. This is going to be a little sticky here, I'm afraid, but not too bad. Okay, and you should be getting enough epoxy squeezing up between those two pieces that you can see it there. So you're not getting a gap between them. It's the gap between them is completely filled with epoxy. If you're a little dry any place, take the strips off and add more epoxy. Don't just say it'll be good enough, because you don't want the strips to ever loosen up. Okay, so positioning, squeezing. Right now I'm squeezing them together with 2 fingers, making sure they meet at the center. And some places they want to stay, you may have to hold them for a second. Some places they want to slide apart. Okay, it's nice if they meet exactly at the center line, because that makes it a tight, nice tight joint. Now it's tempting at this point just to put masking tape across. Trouble with that idea is that then you can't clean off along the edges or under the tape. So you're going to have an awful lot of sanding, and it's hard to sand right up against the edge of the veneer without hitting the veneer and sanding through it. So we want to have the option of wiping off any excess epoxy along here. So we're going to go with the pins, and you'll have little pinholes, but they're really almost invisible, and so I don't think they will bother you ever. Just regular straight pins is all we're talking about. Now, there is a technique though to getting these pins in correctly. And we'll see how many pins we need. Depending on your strips of veneer, how flat they were, you might need more pins or fewer pins than what we're going to use here. These strips of veneer happen to be fairly straight and flat. If your strips are a little more wavy, no problem, you just need more pins. Okay, so let's zoom in up here and see. I think to start at the very front of the boat is smart, because otherwise if you start at the other end you might get to the front and find that you are short. Let's see if we can zoom in and show you this technique, because it's a little bit tricky. Not difficult, but a little tricky. Okay, the key is going to be to keep the veneers positioned exactly right. Now when I do this, my fingers are going to block, so I'll have to do it this way. Block your view. Okay, so there's the pin. There, I guess that's the best background for you to see it. There. See, I'm grabbing it with the needle nose pliers about 1/4 of an inch up from the tip of the pin. It's not a super heavy pin, and I don't want to split the end of the veneer, so I'm back about 1/2 an inch from the end of the veneer. Actually, well, even more like 3/4 of an inch from the front end of the veneer. Okay, number 1. I think I would do both sides so you don't get to the back and find that when you start your second side you didn't do the first side quite right. That it's skidded down or something. So I think I would do both sides at once. And it does help if you don't have serrated teeth on your needle nose pliers. I don't think you're going to have much luck. The serrated teeth are important. Okay, so there are 2 approaches here. One is just use a pin wherever you think you need it. The other approach is space the pins evenly apart. Let's try the even spacing approach and see if that's working. Trouble with that is if you need a pin in between, you really ought to put one in wherever you need one. So not to worry, the pinholes are really virtually invisible when this is done. But we're going to try the even spacing between pins. Although, right here, we're going to put pins right in between. That spacing is too much. The big thing is to get it tight. That's all that matters. Doesn't matter how many pins you use, just so you have it down tight everywhere. You grab the pin too far back with the needle nose pliers, you'll find it bends the pin. And then you have to throw that pin away and get a new pin. These pins are really quite nice. Some pins are awfully skinny. It's going to be hard for you to tell how thick that pin is, but it's just a regular sewing pin. It wasn't anything special. But if you somehow have a batch of super thin pins, that makes this process a little bit more difficult. Okay, I think you maybe get the idea pretty good there. I don't know if you need to watch it all. I'm guessing that the spacing I started with, and the pins on both sides, it's a little hard to see the pins on this side towards you, but here's 1, 2, 3 pins here, and on the back side 1, 2, 3 pins. And I think it does look nice to have pairs of pins. So your holes on each side are going to be lined up. I would go with that personally, but you may have other concepts in mind. One thing you do want to make sure is that you don't have the pieces peaked up, pushing against each other more than the angle of the deck. I'm going to get down and look, make sure I haven't pushed them up, because then there'd be a hollow space underneath them in the center, and that would not be good. Okay, I think that looks pretty much the same as the angle of the deck, so I think we're okay there. Okay, so the peaking up, I don't know if you can see it, but if you push the pieces together too much, they'll lift up in the middle, and then you'll have a void right along the center line that might not be filled with glue, and that'll cause you problems. So have them touching, but not peaked up, pulling away from the boat. Okay, I think we're in good shape here, a little bit sticky, but we'll keep going along the whole length, and my plan is to start with spacing of 3 inches, this pin to this pin about 3 inches, all the way along, and if there are places I need to put more pins in, I'll come back. I can do it 1.5 inches like this, and that's fine too. So we'll see what works best. I'll be back as soon as we get this pin together. Just take a few minutes. Went very smoothly, went very well. Now we just have the cleaning up to do. I wanted to show that to you. But even though I was thinking we might be able to space our pins 3 inches apart, it turned out that it worked much better spacing them closer. That is 1 1/4 inches on most of them. 1 1/4. Just under 1 1/4 inches. So we have 35 pairs of pins along here. That's 70 pins. You might want to start out with 100 pins because you bend a few. And I think we did pretty well about having the 2 sides. I can show you with these business cards exactly what we were talking about. I think you'll be able to see it pretty well here. So you want the 2 sides to meet exactly in the middle, evenly, like so. I don't know, maybe that's clear. You don't want one side overlapping the other or so like that. You want them to meet together. That's a little tricky because when you push them together, sometimes one will want to overlap a little bit. So pull it back a little bit. As you push the pin in, you can either push the veneer up into place or pull it back slightly. So you have that option just before you push the pin all the way in. Okay, now the real purpose of the business cards, in fact, I should show you this one. This is the Pacific Northwest Model Yacht Club, pnmyc.org. Great website. Those are our T37s sailing there, and that's a wonderful project after you finish your kayak. Now you have a boat to chase your T37s with. They're radio controlled, so you can sail them from shore, or it'd be fun to sail them all the way down a 5-mile long lake from your kayak. So either way is great. So business cards, this is our card. The PNMYC card is a nice stiff one. That'll work well. Either one would work. but we're just going to take it and scrape right along that inner edge there. The key is not to dislodge your pins as you do this. And we'll get a nice clean edge there. Okay, you can see how much epoxy we're getting off as we clean that up. And we'll go over that a few times to make sure we've got everything off. All the excess epoxy. It's very hard to sand epoxy out of this joint, out of this angle later on, so pretty much what you do now is going to be what you get. You're not going to be able to go back and sand it out. Oh, and that does remind me, one other thing. Putting in 70 pins took, I would say, a little about 20 minutes or so. So you don't want to start that project if you're working in a warm climate. Don't start it in the middle of the day, the hottest part of the day. Even though it seems like a small project, it takes a little bit longer than you might be guessing. So don't start it when it's too warm. It doesn't hurt to clean off on top of the veneer, between the pins a little bit, any bigger clumps. It just is so much easier to take off liquid epoxy than it is to sand off hard epoxy. But on top of the veneer, that's an easy surface to access. We'll be able to sand it later, so we don't have to be too careful of that. We're really focusing on cleaning off along the inside edge here. Okay, good. Okay, so I'll do the other side, and then we'll be back with you. And any place there are larger globs of epoxy on top of the veneer, I'm going to clean those off because I don't want to have to sand them. It's so much easier to clean it off. Seems a little futzy and meticulous to clean off between the pins, but it's still quite a bit easier than sanding off hard epoxy. So I'll go along there too. Okay, that gives you a good idea of that process, and it looks very clean, very neat, very straight, and nice little detail. So I'm glad we did that. Okay, and then we'll be back and we'll glue the cedar rails along the top of the splash guards. So we'll be back with you soon. We do have to do that, gluing the cedar rails along the top of the splash guards over there on the other table. We do have to do that while that epoxy we put along the edge is still tacky. Or wet. We don't want it to set up hard because we won't get the chemical bond if we let it set up hard. So we can't go off and have lunch or say it's late and we don't want to do it tonight. We want to do it as part of this process. Okay, so we'll be back to that in just a minute.